Hi everyone, this is Chris again. 3rd January 2012 was the day we departed Singapore, when I posted my video of healing on the 3rd of January 2022. It's a nice milestone of achievement of finally having this closure at the 10th anniversary of my Afghanistan journey. Let me share what exactly happened to me after I came back from Afghanistan and how I've able to make sense of many things. Some context, right? I grew up in the so-called 2.5G army, where I enlisted in the Singapore Armed Forces to do my national service at the age of 18. I did well enough in basic military training. I was sent to OCS, and going through OCS, then we were part of the O system. We were the last batch of the infantry officer cadet corps 290 IOCC. And in that O system, before it went into a tri-service system, I guess we were conditioned to be very hardcore infantry. You just learn to suck it up, where we learn that you don't cry or you don't complain about sprained ankles, you just move on. And then I was fortunate in the midst of my national service. I was shortlisted and I was accepted into West Point. And at West Point, I started to learn this, or even maybe before West Point, right? That pain is weakness leaving the body. And so that was part of the conditioning about suppressing your emotional pain, or your emotion of feeling pain, and continuing with the mission because you're a soldier. And so you fast forward to May 20th, 2012 was when my team and I touched down in Singapore. I was perfectly fine. And as you recall, we had our so-called decompression leave. I think it was almost 1.5 months, if I recall. And in between, I had my post-deployment medical checkup. And I think the post-medical deployment checkup was sometime, I think in August or September, about 3 months later. But the thing with mental unwellness is there's no checklist to follow. There's no fixed timeline to follow. It just hits you gradually. Around July, if I remember correctly, was when my knees started buckling. Or just after the school holidays, when I started sending my kids to school. And then, as I shared, about maybe a couple of weeks later, my right knee started to buckle. And then that's where I had this whole phobia and all. Now, what I realized was sometime later on, this was maybe 2 years later, that, when your body is absorbing a lot of stress and you're mentally unwell, what you don't realize is the body will find ways to release all that stress. And that's why they call it decompression. But this release of stress has no timeline. It can happen anytime, it can happen suddenly, violently, or it can happen very gradually. And in my case, I guess it was exacerbated because the moment I landed in Singapore, I had assumed brigade command. And knowing that I had to prepare an entirely new team that was national service or reserves, you only have so little time to prepare the team to fight a two-sided exercise in January. And so even though I was given that room to decompress, the mind went into mission planning mode. And so cognitively, I believe what happened in my brain was it suppressed the part that was supposed to allow me to decompress. So I guess eventually, over a very gradual process, what happens was the body or the mind will find ways to sort of shout out for help. But because we don't understand the language of the subconscious and what it's trying to communicate to you, you end up ignoring it because of this thing that I grew up with, this notion of pain is weakness leaving the body. So what happens is when your body absorbs so much stress, think of it like a pressure cooker. When the pressure cooker explodes, usually in investigations, where is the weakest spot? It's usually the part where you screw to prevent the release of pressure. Maybe it was not properly screwed back and so it exploded as the pressure built up. So that's what happens. When I had to release all the pressure within, naturally the stress would find all the weak points in my body. And so, how I've made sense from 2 years, from 2014 onwards, when I started to think back to my condition and what I was experiencing, that's what happened. The stress attacked or left my body in 3 areas, 3 weak points. One was this thing about my knees, because since West Point days, training for marathon, or even before that, in OCS, when we had to do a lot of force marches, and I used to enjoy carrying the 84 recoilless rifle or the GPMG, because it's about, how much pain and suffering you can endure. And so that's why when the stress had to leave my body, it attacked my knees. Second was my right shoulder. What happened was I had initially experienced a sublux when I was in OCS boxing class. And then at West Point, during Beast Barracks on the 6th day, as I dove under a log when we were doing the Soldier Fitness Challenge, my shoulder sort of popped out. And because of that, I was fortunate enough to be a test subject in this new experimental reconstruction technique. It's called the arthroscopic surgery on my right shoulder by Dr. Asiero. And because of that, that was my second weak point. And the third weak point was before I left for Afghanistan, I was posted to army plans, and those times there were many deadlines that I had to meet, and so I pulled many midnight oil sessions, and I was probably thriving on 3 hours of sleep. And over a prolonged period, I guess some of the nerves here not this part, but my right eye twitched a little, very, very little. And so what had happened was in Afghanistan, because of all the stress that my body had to endure, I guess when it had to decompress, this was where my eye started to twitch with increasing frequency. And if I look back, my right paralysis on my right side started probably somewhere mid-deployment after the incidences post Koran burning incident. Probably around end of May, thereabouts, now that I recall. But being that gung-ho soldier, then you dismiss it and you think that it's just like pins and needles. You did not sleep well. And then especially the week before I left Afghanistan, while I was handing over to the new team that came, I remember my eyes started twitching really, really badly. But in between then, very, very slightly, intermittently. And then was just the eye twitching. It didn't really affect the nerves here yet. The degeneration here, if I could say it, probably happened only after I came back to Singapore. Now, how do I know My body had taken on so much stress that I could not endure anymore. When I handed over the command of the rotation to the incoming team, the night that we left Camp Alamo, the moment we reached Bagram Air Base in Kabul, we had to pull sentry duty to guard our weapons while we waited for a flight up. That night, for some reason, my brain just shut off and I became a walking zombie for the next 3 days. Now, I could not see myself then, but I was supposed to pull sentry duty with my sergeant major. And throughout the next day, until we arrived back in Kuwait, where it was safe to do so, he must have known that something wasn't right, because he just let me rest throughout the night, or let me sleep throughout the night. And I felt bad, but looking back now, I was probably in a daze, because when the mind knew that physically it was safe, with all the stress that the body had taken in, knowing that it's safe already, the mind just shut down completely. And that's how I can relate now to all the things that happened during deployment, post-deployment, and make sense of it. Now, I'm no psychologist, I have no medical background, but just like what Viktor Frankl did in Man's Search for Meaning, I have observed or reflected on my own journey, and after 10 years, this is what I've been able to make sense of. The lesson that I learned from my own journey is when you have stress and your body needs to decompress or release that stress, what it does is it will find all your old injuries, and that's where it finds the path of least resistance, just like water, to expel that stress from your body. And that has been my story.